They called us the comedy species. Across 1,000 worlds, in cantinas and council chambers, at diplomatic summits and military academies, the galaxy's greatest civilizations would share the same joke: humanity. The bipedal mammals who conquered their own world through sheer stubbornness, who built cities in deserts and farms on ice, who looked at the vast emptiness between stars and said, "We'll take that too." The Zephyrian Empire, masters of quantum warfare, would chuckle through their crystalline vocal cords. The Corvin hegemony, whose bioships could devour entire fleets, would ripple with amusement across their collective consciousness. Even the ancient ethereals, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form millennia ago, found our existence quaint. Humans, they would say, the species that thinks violence is a solution. They weren't wrong. We did think violence was a solution. Sometimes the only solution. They just never asked themselves why we were still alive to be violent. When the Devourers came, the galaxy-eating swarm that had consumed 3 neighboring galaxies, the laughter stopped. When every superweapon failed, every quantum barrier shattered, every hive-mind unity crumbled before the endless hunger, the galaxy's greatest civilizations did what they had never done before. They called us. "Please," said the Zephyrian High Command, their crystalline forms flickering with desperate light. "You're our last hope." We didn't say "we told you so." We didn't ask for apologies. We didn't even negotiate terms. We just asked one question: where do we drop? This is the story of how humanity saved a galaxy that had spent 200 years calling us primitive. This is the story of how the comedy species became the stuff of legends. This is the story of why the galaxy learned that sometimes, when everything else fails, you need someone crazy enough to walk into hell with a smile. Because while everyone else was busy being civilized, we never forgot the most important lesson our violent little world had taught us. Sometimes the only way forward is through. Admiral Sarah Chan stood on the observation deck of the UES Determination, watching the Zephyrian delegation approach through the viewport. Their ship looked like a floating crystal cathedral, all graceful curves and shimmering energy fields. Beautiful, she had to admit. Impractical as hell, but beautiful. Admiral, her aide, Lieutenant Rodriguez, stepped up beside her. "The Zephyrian delegation is requesting permission to board." "Granted," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off their ship. "And Rodriguez? Make sure the coffee's fresh. Something tells me they're going to need it." The Zephyrian High Ambassador, HFY, materialized on the bridge in a shower of golden light particles. Sarah had met him before, at the Galactic Council sessions where humanity was perpetually treated like the kid brother who'd somehow snuck into the adults' poker game. Back then, his crystalline form had radiated the kind of superior amusement that made Sarah want to show him exactly why humans had a reputation for creative violence. Today, that amusement was nowhere to be found. Today, ZOITHK's crystal body flickered with the rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation among his species. "Admiral Chun," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance that all Zephyrians use for formal address. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Skip the pleasantries, Ambassador," Sarah said, turning from the viewport. "Your message said it was urgent. Something about the outer rim colonies going dark." The crystal being's light dimmed. Not just the outer rim, the entire Kepler sector. 43 star systems. Over 200 billion souls. Sarah felt her coffee go cold in her hands. "Gone. Consumed," the YTH said, and his voice carried a harmonic that Sarah had never heard from a Zephyrian before. "Fear. Admiral, we need to show you something." The bridge's main holo display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones spread across what had been the Kepler sector like a cancer, pulsing with malevolent energy. "This is sensor data from our deep space monitoring stations," ZYTH explained. "The enemy appeared 3 weeks ago at the edge of the Kepler sector. By the time our rapid response fleets arrived, the first system was already." He paused, searching for the right word. "Harvested." "Harvested how?" Sarah asked, though she was pretty sure she didn't want to know the answer. The display zoomed in on a star system. Where planets should have been, there was nothing but empty space and debris clouds. The star itself looked wrong, dimmed, and gutted. They consume everything, HFY said. Planets, moons, asteroids, even the stellar matter itself. They leave behind only dead space and move on to the next system. Our xenobiologists believe they're a hive mind species, possibly extragalactic in origin. Sarah studied the data, her military mind already running calculations. Response time, 4 days per system, on average. Admiral, at this rate of expansion, they'll reach the core worlds in less than 6 months. What about the Corvin hegemony? Their bioships are supposed to be able to adapt to any threat. HFY's light flickered. The hegemony sent their entire third fleet, 12 bio-dreadnoughts, each one capable of reshaping itself at the molecular level. The fleet engaged the enemy at the Arcturus system, and we detected the biosignatures of the Corvin ships for approximately 14 minutes after engagement began. Then, silence. Sarah set down her coffee cup. Hard. 14 minutes? Those bioships are supposed to be practically indestructible. Were HFY corrected? Admiral, we have engaged these entities with everything in our arsenal. Quantum disruptors, gravity bombs, reality-warping weapons that tear apart space-time itself. Nothing works. They adapt, they consume, and they grow stronger. Sarah turned back to the viewport, watching the graceful dance of ships in the fleet around them. Human ships, ugly and functional, bristling with enough firepower to level continents. Ships that have been built by a species the galaxy considered barely above barbarism. So why come to us? She asked. Last time we met, your people were voting to restrict human expansion into the midrim. Something about us being dangerously unpredictable and prone to violent solutions. HFY's harmonic shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. Admiral, we've tried everything. Conventional warfare, exotic weapons, even diplomatic contact attempts. Nothing stops them. The ethereals have withdrawn to their pocket dimensions. The machine collective has gone into full defensive mode. Half the galaxy is preparing to flee to the Andromeda galaxy, and the other half is hoping that perhaps the species known for violent solutions might have one more trick to try. Sarah almost smiled. Almost. You want the crazy humans to go poke the galaxy-eating monsters with a stick and see what happens. To put it crudely, yes. Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who had been quietly recording everything. The young lieutenant's face was pale, but his eyes held the same stubborn fire that had gotten humanity noticed by the galaxy in the first place. The same fire that had driven them to colonize hostile worlds, to fight wars against impossible odds, to keep pushing forward when any sane species would have retreated. Rodriguez signaled the fleet. All ships to battle stations. And give me a direct line to command on Earth. Admiral, HFY interrupted. You haven't even seen the full scope of the threat. These beings are beyond anything we've encountered. They may be impossible to defeat through conventional means. Sarah turned to face the crystal being, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she smiled. It wasn't a particularly friendly smile. Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We've spent our entire history being told that things were impossible. Impossible to fly. Impossible to reach the stars. Impossible to survive in the vacuum of space. Impossible to build a civilization that could stand alongside species 1,000,000 years older than us. She gestured at the fleet around them. And yet here we are. You want to know why we're still alive? It's not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. It's because when everyone else sees an impossible problem, we see a challenge. The communication system chimed, and Rodriguez nodded. Admiral, I have General Harrison on the line from Strategic Command. Patch him through. The holo display shifted to show a grizzled man in his 60s, the kind of career soldier who'd cut his teeth on the brutal colony wars of humanity's early expansion. General Harrison looked like he'd been carved from granite and disappointment. Sarah, he said without preamble, I'm assuming this has to do with the Zephyrian situation reports we've been monitoring. That's right, General. They're requesting our assistance with a xenophage incursion. Harrison's expression didn't change. Casualties, 43 star systems. Complete consumption of all matter, including stellar mass. Timeline, 6 months to core worlds at current expansion rate. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. What's our fleet strength in the region? 7th Fleet is conducting training exercises in the Vega sector. 12 dreadnoughts, 48 cruisers, full support vessels. Admiral Martinez has the 3rd Fleet on patrol duty in the Centauri cluster, similar strength. And what do we know about enemy capabilities? Sarah glanced at HFY, who had been following the conversation with obvious amazement. The Zephyrians prided themselves on lengthy deliberations, careful analysis, and consensus building. The idea that a major military decision could be made in a 5-minute conversation apparently violated their understanding of how civilization was supposed to work. Unknown origin, possibly extragalactic, appears to be a hive mind collective with matter conversion capabilities. Has successfully engaged and destroyed Corvin biofleets and Zephyrian quantum weapons. Harrison nodded slowly. Sounds like our kind of problem. I'll mobilize the 5th and 8th fleets for backup. You're in overall command of the operation, Admiral. Rules of engagement. Sarah looked at the red zones spreading across the galactic map. Whatever it takes, General. Understood. Harrison out. The connection closed, leaving the bridge in relative silence. ZYTH's crystalline form was cycling through colors Sarah had never seen before. Admiral, he said finally, your species just committed to a military action against an unknown enemy of unprecedented power in less time than it takes my people to decide on lunch arrangements. That's because we don't have time for committee meetings, Sarah said. Ambassador, I need everything your people have on these creatures. Sensor readings, tactical assessments, samples if you have them. And I need it in the next 6 hours. Of course, but, Admiral, you must understand the magnitude of what you're facing. These entities have capabilities that defy our understanding of physics. They convert matter at rates that shouldn't be possible. They seem to learn and adapt from every engagement. Sarah walked back to the viewport, watching as human ships began moving into formation. Each vessel was a testament to humanity's approach to problem solving. If something doesn't work, try something bigger. If that doesn't work, try something even bigger. What makes you think humanity can succeed where the greatest civilizations in the galaxy have failed? Sarah turned back to him, and her smile was sharper than any weapon the Zephyrians had ever built. Because we've never met a problem we couldn't solve by hitting it harder. The Zephyrian ambassador's light flickered uncertainly. And if that doesn't work, then we'll find something harder to hit it with. Through the viewport, the first ships were already jumping to hyperspace, racing toward the edge of human space to gather intelligence on an enemy that had consumed 43 star systems in 3 weeks. Racing toward what would either be humanity's greatest victory or its final battle. But Admiral Sarachon had been in enough fights to know one thing for certain. If humanity was going down, they were going to take a lot of the bastards with them. And sometimes that was enough. Captain Marcus Webb crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a Corvin bioship, watching through his rifle scope as the creatures worked. Calling them creatures felt wrong. Somehow, they moved with too much purpose, too much coordination. Like parts of a single mind distributed across 1,000 bodies. Jesus Christ, whispered Sergeant Kim from somewhere to his left. Look at the size of that thing. Webb adjusted his scope and immediately wished he hadn't. The devourer in question was roughly the size of a city block, its carapace gleaming with an oily, organic sheen that seemed to absorb light. 6 massive legs carried it across the desolate surface of what had been the garden world of Kepler Prime, and along its sides, Webb could see smaller creatures detaching themselves like parasites leaving a host. Size isn't everything, Sergeant, Webb murmured into his calm. Remember what Admiral Chin said. We're here to learn, not to fight. Not yet, anyway. The reconnaissance mission to Kepler Prime had been Webb's idea, and he was starting to regret it. When Admiral Chun had asked for volunteers to get close to the enemy and gather intelligence, Webb and his team from the 42nd Recon Battalion had stepped forward without hesitation. They'd done impossible infiltrations before, slipped through enemy lines that had stopped entire armies. But those enemies had been human, or at least comprehensible. These things were something else entirely. Movement to the north, reported Corporal Zhang, the team's tech specialist. 3 smaller units, heading toward our position. Webb swung his scope around and felt his blood run cold. The approaching creatures were roughly humanoid in shape, but that was where any resemblance to terrestrial life ended. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, their surfaces rippled with organic circuitry that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and where their heads should have been were clusters of sensory organs that tracked back and forth like radar dishes. "They know we're here," Webb said quietly. "Impossible qui me replied. We're using full-spectrum dampening. No heat signature, no electromagnetic radiation, no." One of the creatures raised what might have been an arm and pointed directly at their position. "Well, shit," said Private Rodriguez. "So much for staying hidden." Webb made a decision that would have horrified his commanding officers. Instead of retreating, he stood up from behind cover and walked into the open, his rifle slung across his shoulder in what he hoped was a non-threatening manner. "Webb, what the hell are you doing?" Kim's voice crackled with static over the comm. "Something stupid," Webb replied. "Probably." The 3 creatures stopped advancing and regarded him with what he assumed was curiosity. Up close, they were even more unsettling. Their skin wasn't really skin at all, but some kind of organic metal that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. The sensor clusters that serve as heads swiveled to track his movement with mechanical precision. "Hello," Webb said, feeling ridiculous but pressing on anyway. "I'm Captain Marcus Webb, United Earth Forces. I'm here to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, one of the creatures spoke. Not with a mouth, because it didn't have one, but with its entire body. The organic metal skin vibrated at frequencies that Webb could feel in his bones, and somehow his brain translated the vibrations into words. "Human," the creature said, and there was something like surprise in its voice. "You are not like the others." "What others?" Webb asked, though he had a pretty good idea. "The crystal beings. The bioforms. The energy entities. They fought us with weapons and shields. You approach with words." Behind him, Webb could hear his team shifting nervously. He keyed his comm to record everything. "We want to understand," he said. "Why are you consuming the star systems? What do you need?" The creature tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human. "Need? We do not understand this concept. We are the collective. We grow. We expand. We incorporate. This is our nature. But you're killing billions of people." "People." The creature's voice carried a harmonic that might have been confusion. "You mean the biological resources? They are incorporated into the collective. They do not die. They become part of something greater." Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the dead planet. "Incorporated how?" Instead of answering, the creature gestured toward the massive bio-ship wreckage behind them. As Webb watched, smaller collective units swarmed over the Corvin vessel, and the organic hull began to dissolve and reshape itself. Within minutes, the wreckage had been converted into something that looked distinctly collective in design. "All matter is useful," the creature explained. "All patterns of information have value. We take what exists and make it better, more efficient, part of the collective. And the people who lived here, their neural patterns are preserved within the collective consciousness. They experience joy at being part of something greater than their individual existence." Webb's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What if they don't want to be part of your collective?" The creature paused, and Webb could swear he saw confusion in its alien posture. "Want? This is another concept we do not understand. Why would any being not wish to be part of perfection?" "Because we're not perfect," Webb said, "and we don't want to be." "You speak of imperfection as though it were desirable. For humans, it is. Our flaws make us who we are. Our mistakes teach us. Our failures make us stronger. The creature's sensor cluster swiveled to examine him more closely. You are an anomaly, human. The other species we have encountered prize logic, efficiency, harmony. You embrace chaos. We embrace choice, Webb corrected. The choice to be better or worse. The choice to succeed or fail. The choice to fight or surrender. And what choice do you make now, human? Webb smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We choose to fight. The creature's posture shifted in what might have been amusement. You are few. We are many. Your weapons cannot harm us. We have adapted to every form of attack the galaxy has produced. Have you adapted to us? Human technology is primitive. Human tactics are crude. Human psychology is chaotic and irrational. There is nothing to adapt to. Webb's smile widened. That's what I was hoping you'd say. He raised his hand, and 3 things happened simultaneously. Zhang triggered the quantum beacon that would signal Admiral Chen's fleet. Kim and Rodriguez opened fire with weapons that weren't designed to kill the collective creatures, but to mark them with nanotracers. And Webb himself activated the dead man switch that would detonate the antimatter charges his team had been carrying. The explosion vaporized a square kilometer of the planet's surface and sent a shockwave racing across the dead landscape. When the light faded, Webb and his team were gone, along with the 3 collective creatures they'd been talking to. But the nanotracers had done their job. As the larger collective units converged on the blast site, each one was tagged with microscopic beacons that would allow human sensors to track them across interstellar distances. 50 million kilometers away, Admiral Chun watched the explosion through long-range sensors aboard the UES Determination. The loss of Webb's team hit her like a physical blow, but the data they transmitted was invaluable. "Did you get all of that?" she asked her intelligence officer, Commander Park. "Every word, Admiral. And the nanotracers are active. We can track any collective unit that was within 5 kilometers of the blast." Sarah nodded grimly. "What's your analysis of their capabilities?" "They're definitely a hive mind, but not in the way we initially thought. They don't share a single consciousness so much as a single set of directives. Each individual unit can act independently, but they're all working toward the same goal, which is incorporation of all matter and information in the galaxy into their collective. They genuinely believe they're improving everything they touch." Sarah turned to study the tactical display. The collective forces were already moving toward the next star system, a steady wave of consumption that had shown no signs of slowing for 3 weeks. Recommendations? Commander Park pulled up a series of holographic analyses. Conventional warfare is useless against them. They adapt too quickly to energy weapons, and their matter conversion abilities make them effectively immune to kinetic attacks. But there's something else, Admiral. Something Webb discovered that might be important. Go on. They don't understand choice. They've encountered dozens of species, but every one of them has been either completely logical or operating under some form of collective decision-making process. The Zephyrians reach consensus through harmonic resonance. The Corvins share a bioneural network. Even the machine species operate on programmed parameters. Sarah felt a spark of something that might have been hope. And humans. Humans are chaos, Admiral. We make decisions based on emotion, instinct, incomplete information, and personal preference. We're the only species in the galaxy that prizes individual choice over collective efficiency. So they can't predict us. More than that, I don't think they can adapt to us. Their entire evolutionary strategy is based on analyzing patterns and developing countermeasures. But how do you develop countermeasures against a species that doesn't follow patterns? Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. Each one was different, shaped by personal experiences and individual choices that had brought them to this moment. Rodriguez, who'd joined the Navy to escape poverty on Mars. Park, whose family had been killed in the Rigel Rebellion, and who'd spent his career studying alien psychology to prevent future conflicts. Even Zyth Carr, who stood in the corner like a crystal statue, representing a species that made every decision through careful deliberation and group consensus. "Ambassador," she said, turning to the Zephyrian, "how long would it take your people to mobilize their entire fleet? For an operation of this magnitude, perhaps 6 months to achieve full consensus, and you've got 6 hours." ZYTH Carr's crystal form flickered with agitation. "Admiral, that's impossible. We cannot make such decisions without proper consultation, analysis, and harmony building among." "Then, don't make a decision," Sarah interrupted. "Just follow ours." She turned to her communications officer. "Signal the fleet. All ships to combat readiness. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we need everything they could spare, and we need it now." "What's the plan, Admiral?" Commander Park asked. Sarah smiled, and there was something wild in her expression that made Carr's light flicker nervously. "We're going to do something completely unpredictable," she said. "We're going to attack." "Admiral," the YTH Carr protested, "the enemy has defeated every force sent against them. They'll adapt to whatever strategy you employ." "Not if we don't have a strategy." The bridge fell silent. Even by human standards, that sounded insane. "Admiral," Commander Park said carefully, "perhaps you could explain that? Every engagement so far has followed logical tactical doctrine. Formations, objectives, coordinated attacks. The kind of warfare that makes sense to any advanced civilization." Sarah pulled up the tactical display, showing the approaching collective forces. "But what if we don't fight like an advanced civilization? What if we fight like humans?" She pointed to different areas of the display. Random attacks from random directions with random objectives. No overall strategy, no coordination, no logical progression. Just 48 different captains making 48 different decisions based on whatever seems like a good idea at the time. "That's not tactics," ZYTH Carr said. "That's chaos." Sarah's smile became predatory. "Exactly. Let's see them adapt to chaos." Outside the viewport, human ships began moving into position for what would either be the most brilliant tactical maneuver in galactic history or the most spectacular disaster. The collective had consumed 43 star systems by following logical, predictable patterns. Now, they were about to meet a species that had survived on a hostile world for millennia by refusing to be logical or predictable. It was going to be interesting. Captain Diana Torres had always prided herself on being predictable, methodical, the kind of officer who followed protocols, filed proper reports, and never colored outside the lines. Her crew aboard the UES Relentless knew exactly what to expect from her in any given situation, which was why her current orders made absolutely no sense. "Ma'am," her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, looked up from his console with barely concealed confusion. "I'm sorry, but could you repeat those orders?" "You heard me correctly, Hayes. When we drop out of hyperspace, you will select a target using your personal preference. Not tactical assessment, not strategic value. Just pick whatever looks interesting to you." "But, Captain, that's not how space combat works," Torres finished. "I know. That's the point." She looked around her bridge at the faces of officers who'd served with her for 3 years. They'd followed her through the brutal campaign in the vegan sector, where they'd used textbook tactics to achieve textbook victories. They trusted her careful planning during the siege of New Barcelona, where her methodical approach had saved thousands of lives. Now she was asking them to throw everything they'd learned out the airlock. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "Admiral Chun is broadcasting to the fleet." "Put it through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main display, and Torres could see the determination in her eyes. Behind her, the bridge of the determination buzzed with controlled chaos. "Attention all ships," Chen said. "In approximately 4 minutes, we will drop out of hyperspace in the Kepler system. What we're about to do violates every principle of naval tactics that any of us have ever learned. We're going to engage a superior enemy force with no coordination, no unified strategy, and no predetermined objectives." Torres could practically feel her crew's confusion radiating around the bridge. "Each captain will make independent decisions based on their own judgment, instincts, and personal preferences. You're not to coordinate with other ships unless directly engaged. You're not to follow standard attack patterns. You're not to do anything that a reasonable tactical analysis would suggest. On the screen, Chin's expression became grimmer. We've lost good people learning about this enemy. They adapt to logical tactics, they counter effective strategies, and they learn from every engagement. So we're not going to be logical or effective. We're going to be human. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Ma'am, Hayes said quietly, this is insane. Yes, Torres agreed. It is. The hyperspace countdown reached 0, and reality exploded back into view. The Kepler system spread before them, and Torres felt her breath catch in her throat. Where there should have been planets, there were only debris fields and harvesting machines. The star itself looked wrong, dimmed, and partially consumed. And everywhere, moving through space like a living disease, were the collective ships. They didn't look like ships exactly, more like organic structures that had grown in space, all curves and tendrils and pulsing bioluminescent patterns. Some were massive, the size of small moons. Others darted between the larger structures like schools of metallic fish. My God, whispered her navigator. There are thousands of them. Target analysis complete, Hayes reported, his training overriding his confusion. Recommend we engage the command structure vessels. If we can disrupt their coordination, no, Torres said, surprising herself. What looks interesting to you, Hayes? Not tactically, personally. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then looked back at his display. Well, there's this cluster of smaller ships that keep changing color. It's kind of pretty, I guess. Then, that's our target. All weapons on the pretty ships. The Relentless surged forward, and around them, the rest of the human fleet scattered in directions that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Captain Morrison of the U.S. Defiance was heading straight for the largest collective vessel, apparently planning to ram it. Captain Abdullah of the U.S. Vengeance had picked a target seemingly at random and was firing every weapon she had while broadcasting classical music on all frequencies. It was chaos. It was insane. It was working. The collective ships that had moved with perfect coordination against every previous enemy suddenly found themselves trying to adapt to attacks that followed no pattern. Ships that should have been targeting their command vessels were instead focusing on whatever caught their captain's attention. Weapons that should have been aimed at strategic weak points were firing at whatever looked unusual or interesting. Direct hit on the color-changing ships. Hayes reported with something like wonder. They're not adapting, Captain. They just took a full spread of photon torpedoes and didn't even try to counter. On the tactical display, Torres could see the same thing happening across the battlefield. Human ships were landing hits that should have been impossible against an enemy that had adapted to counter every weapon the galaxy had thrown at them. But they hadn't adapted to weapons fired by someone who thought the target looked interesting. Captain Torres. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the bridge chatter. I need you to do something else that's going to sound crazy. More crazy than what we're already doing, Admiral. I need you to take your ship and ram that harvesting platform. Torres looked at the tactical display. The platform in question was roughly the size of Manhattan and bristled with what were obviously defensive systems. Admiral, that will destroy us. Maybe, or maybe not. The point is, it's something no rational captain would ever do. And, right now, irrational is our greatest weapon. Torres looked around her bridge. Her crew was watching her with expressions that ranged from terror to excitement. These were people who had trusted her judgment for years, who had followed her through battles where careful planning and methodical execution had meant the difference between life and death. Now, she was asking them to die for no better reason than because it was unpredictable. All hands, she announced over the ship's comm system. This is the captain. In approximately 3 minutes, we are going to ram a collective harvesting platform. This will very likely kill us all. Anyone who wants to transfer to the escape pods has my permission to do so. She waited, watching her crew's faces. No one moved. Well then, she said with a smile that surprised her with its fierceness. Let's go do something stupid. The Relentless turned toward the harvesting platform, her engines pushing beyond safe operational limits. Around them, space was filled with the chaos of the most unpredictable battle in galactic history. Human ships were doing things that violated every principle of space combat, and the collective was struggling to respond to tactics that weren't tactics at all. 30 seconds to impact, reported her navigator. Collective vessel is powering weapons, Hayes added. They're going to try to stop us. Can they? Probably. Torres nodded. But they don't know that we know that. Fire everything we have, not at them, but at that asteroid field to our left. Ma'am, just do it. The Relentless unleashed her full arsenal at a cluster of rocks that posed no threat to anyone. The collective harvesting platform, programmed to defend against logical attacks, had positioned its shields to deflect weapons aimed at its vital systems. It wasn't prepared for a suicidal ramming attack combined with weapons fire directed at empty space. Torres felt the ship shudder as they entered the platform's defensive perimeter. Warning klaxons screamed across the bridge. Hull temperature spiked into the red zone. And then, impossibly, they were through. The Relentless struck the harvesting platform like a missile, her reinforced hull tearing through defensive barriers that had been positioned to stop conventional attacks. For a moment, Torres thought they had simply traded their lives for minimal damage to the enemy. Then, the platform began to collapse in on itself. "What's happening?" she asked, dragging herself up from where the impact had thrown her. Hayes, blood running from a cut on his forehead, stared at his displays in amazement. "We hit some kind of central processing core. The whole platform is losing structural integrity." On the main screen, the massive harvesting platform was indeed falling apart, its organic components writhing as they lost connection to the collective network. Smaller ships that had been docked with it were drifting away, apparently inactive. "Admiral Chun to all ships," came the broadcast. "Whatever Captain Torres just did, it worked. Multiple collective vessels are going offline. Continue random attack patterns and target anything that looks important to you personally." Torres looked around her bridge at her crew. They were battered, bleeding, and half their systems were offline. But they were alive, and they had just achieved something that the greatest military minds in the galaxy had thought impossible. "Damage report," she called out. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, reported her damage control officer. "Life support is holding. We've lost main engines, but we still have maneuvering thrusters. Weapons. Photon torpedo launchers are offline, but we still have point defense systems." Torres nodded and looked at the tactical display. The battle was far from over, but the collective's perfect coordination was breaking down. Human ships were scoring hits against an enemy that seemed unable to adapt to pure, irrational chaos. "Ma'am," Hayes said quietly, "I have to ask, how did you know that would work?" Torres thought about it for a moment. "I didn't. That was kind of the point." She opened a channel to Admiral Chun. "Admiral, the Relentless is combat capable, but limited. What are your orders?" "Find another target that looks interesting, Captain, and keep being unpredictable." Torres smiled and turned to her tactical officer. "Hayes, what catches your eye?" Hayes studied his display, and slowly a grin spread across his face. "There's a group of ships that seem to be trying to form some kind of pattern, like they're trying to restore order to their formation." "Can't have that," Torres said. "Let's go mess up their day." The Relentless limped toward her next target, trailing atmosphere and debris but still fighting. Around them, the most powerful fleet in human history was waging war in the most human way possible, by making it up as they went along. For the first time since the collective had appeared, they were not adapting. They were not learning. They were not winning. They were confused. And for a species that had conquered 3 galaxies through perfect efficiency and logical adaptation, confusion was the most dangerous weapon they had ever encountered. The collective mind had consumed 1,247 civilizations across 3 galaxies. It had incorporated the accumulated knowledge, technology, and biological patterns of countless species into its ever-growing consciousness. Every encounter had followed the same pattern: Analyze, adapt, overcome, incorporate. This was different. The human vessels moved through space without formation, without apparent strategy, without any logical purpose that the collective could discern. When one ship engaged a harvesting platform, another would attack empty space. When a group of collective vessels moved to counter what appeared to be a flanking maneuver, they found nothing there while their actual targets were being destroyed by weapons fired from seemingly random directions. The collective had never encountered chaos before. Not true chaos. Other species had made desperate last stands, had broken formation under pressure, had acted irrationally in the face of defeat. But this was something else entirely. This was organized chaos, as if the humans had made insanity into a tactical doctrine. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, watching the tactical display with something approaching amazement. The human fleet was taking casualties. There was no denying that. The collective's weapons were devastating, and their adaptive capabilities meant that any ship using the same tactic twice was likely to be destroyed. But the humans weren't using the same tactic twice. They weren't using tactics at all. Admiral, Commander Park reported, Captain Johnson reports that he's discovered something interesting about their command structure. Put him through. Captain Johnson's face appeared on the screen, and Sarah could see the bridge of the UES Intrepid behind him, smoke rising from damaged consoles. Admiral, we've been monitoring collective communications during the engagement. Their hive mind isn't as unified as we thought. Explain. They have different voices, for lack of a better word. Different aspects of their consciousness that handle different functions. There's a strategic planning voice, a tactical adaptation voice, a resource allocation voice, and so on. When they encounter a logical threat, all the voices work together perfectly. Sarah felt a spark of understanding. But when they encounter illogical threats, the voices start arguing with each other. The strategic planning voice says we should be targeting their command vessels, but we're attacking their waste disposal units instead. The tactical adaptation voice tries to counter our weapons, but we're firing at empty space. The resource allocation voice can't figure out what we're trying to accomplish, so it doesn't know what resources to deploy. Sarah looked at the tactical display, where Captain Martinez of the UES Fury was currently chasing a small collective repair drone with every weapon his ship possessed, apparently for no reason other than that it had been painted an unusual shade of purple. They're having a mental breakdown, she said with something like wonder. That's one way to put it, Johnson replied. Admiral, I think we might actually be able to win this. Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Rodriguez called out from his station. Admiral, massive energy buildup from the collective core ship. It's 10 times larger than anything we've seen before. Sarah turned to the display and felt her blood run cold. The collective core ship was indeed massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it was positioned at the heart of their formation like a queen protected by her workers. Energy readings from the vessel were climbing to levels that defied comprehension. Analysis? She barked. Unknown, Admiral. But if I had to guess, I'd say they're about to deploy some kind of superweapon. Ambassador Zwitych Carr, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the bridge, suddenly flared with brilliant light. Admiral, I recognize those energy patterns. It's a consciousness bomb. And what? The Ethereals developed them during their war with the machine collective 10,000 years ago. It's a weapon that attacks the mind rather than the body. It forces all consciousness within its range to merge into a single, unified thought pattern. Sarah felt the implications hit her like a physical blow. They're going to turn our entire fleet into a hive mind. Precisely. And once your captains are all thinking the same way, the collective will be able to predict and counter your every move. The energy readings from the core ship continue to climb. Whatever they were building toward, it was going to happen soon. Time to deployment? Sarah asked. Rodriguez was running calculations frantically. 90 seconds, maybe less. Sarah looked around her bridge at her crew, these humans who had spent the last hour proving that chaos could be a weapon. If the collective forced them into unified thinking, If they lost the beautiful, chaotic individuality that made them human, they would become just another species to be incorporated. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. She broadcast on all frequencies. The collective is about to deploy a weapon that will force our minds to think as one. If that happens, we lose everything that makes us human. She paused, looking at the tactical display where her ships continued their insane dance of destruction. I'm ordering all vessels to scatter. Get as far from the core ship as possible. Run if you have to. Live to fight another day. For a moment, there was silence on the channel. Then, Captain Torres's voice crackled through the static. With respect, Admiral, screw that. Captain Torres, that's a direct order, and I'm disobeying it, Torres replied calmly. The Relentless is in no shape to run, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend my last 90 seconds following orders. Other voices began joining the channel. Captain Johnson, Captain Martinez, Captain Abdullah. One by one, every human captain in the fleet was refusing to retreat. This is mutiny, Sarah said, though she couldn't keep the pride out of her voice. No, ma'am, came Captain Morrison's drawl. This is human. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with decision clear in her expression. All right, you beautiful, stubborn, impossible bastards. If we're going to die, let's make it count. I want every ship to target that core vessel. Everything we have. Admiral, Commander Park interrupted. Their defenses are too strong. We don't have enough firepower to penetrate. I'm not talking about firepower, Sarah said. I'm talking about rams. The bridge fell silent. Every ship, full ramming speed toward the core vessel. If they want to make us think alike, they'll have to survive our last moment of thinking differently. ZYTH Car's crystalline form flickered with alarm. Admiral, that will destroy your entire fleet. Maybe, or maybe not, but it'll definitely be something they don't expect. The countdown to the consciousness bomb continued. 60 seconds. 50. Across the fleet, 46 human vessels turned toward the massive collective core ship. Some, like the Relentless, were barely holding together. Others, like the Determination, were still at near-combat effectiveness. It didn't matter. They were all going to the same place. 40 seconds to weapon deployment, Rodriguez reported. All ships reporting ready for ramming attack. Came the communications officer's report. Sarah opened a general channel. Attention, all vessels. It has been an honor serving with you. If anyone wants to say any last words, now's the time. Captain Johnson's voice was the first to respond. This one's for Webb and his team. Captain Torres followed. See you on the other side. One by one, 46 human voices offered their final thoughts. Some were profound. Some were crude. Some were just the names of people they'd loved. All of them were uniquely, chaotically, beautifully human. 20 seconds, Rodriguez called out. The human fleet accelerated toward the collective core ship like a swarm of angry wasps. Point defense systems opened fire, trying to stop them, but the humans weren't following attack patterns that could be predicted or countered. They came from above, below, from angles that made no tactical sense, at speeds that violated safety protocols. 10 seconds to consciousness bomb deployment, Rodriguez announced. 5, 4, 3, 2. The U.S. Determination struck the collective core ship at 20% of light speed, her hull disintegrating on impact, but her momentum carrying the wreckage deep into the alien vessel structure. Around her, 45 other ships did the same, each one targeting a different section of the massive vessel based on nothing more than their captain's personal preference. The consciousness bomb fired at the moment of impact, and, for an instant, every human mind in the fleet was connected to every other. Sarah Chun felt the thoughts and memories of hundreds of officers and crew members flooding through her consciousness. The fear, the determination, the love for families they might never see again. But instead of creating the unified hive mind that the collective expected, the consciousness bomb was overwhelmed by the sheer chaotic diversity of human thought. 46 different ships' crews, each one thinking different thoughts, feeling different emotions, believing different things. The collective consciousness, evolved to operate as a perfect unity, was suddenly flooded with the most chaotic, contradictory, irrational set of thoughts it had ever encountered. The effect was like injecting pure noise into a computer system. The hive mind didn't just break down. It went insane. Across the Kepler system, collective vessels stopped mid-maneuver. Some began attacking each other. Others simply drifted, their crews no longer able to function as part of a coherent whole. The perfect unity that had allowed them to consume 3 galaxies was shattered by contact with minds that had never been unified, never been logical, never been predictable. When Sarah Chun regained consciousness, she was floating in an escape pod with a dozen other survivors from the Determination. Through the pod's viewport, she could see the wreckage of the human fleet scattered across space. But she could also see something else. The collective ships were withdrawing, not retreating in good order, but fleeing in panic from an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't adapt to, couldn't incorporate. "Admiral," came a weak voice from one of the other pods. It was Captain Torres. "Did we win?" Sarah looked out at the chaos of the battlefield, where the species that had conquered 3 galaxies was running away from 46 destroyed human ships. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think we did, but the cost had been enormous. The human fleet was gone. Thousands of good people were dead. And somewhere in the galaxy, the survivors of the collective were regrouping, trying to understand what had happened to them. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the collective had appeared, they had been defeated. Not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the one thing no hive mind could ever truly understand: the beautiful, chaotic, impossible diversity of individual human choice. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the council chambers of the Galactic Assembly, looking out at faces that had once regarded humanity with barely concealed amusement. The same beings who had voted to restrict human expansion, who had debated whether humans were truly ready for galactic civilization, who had shared jokes about the violent primitives from a solar system. They weren't laughing anymore. The chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by dozens of species working together. Crystalline spires that sang with Zephyrian harmonic frequencies rose alongside bioarchitectural structures that pulsed with Corvin life rhythms. Holographic displays showed real-time data from across the galaxy, and the air itself was carefully managed to support the atmospheric requirements of 30 different species. It was a monument to order, cooperation, and logical civilization. Sarah hated it. Admiral Chun, the ethereal representative, spoke through its energy projection. "The Assembly recognizes your presence. Please provide your report on the current status of the collective threat." Sarah stepped up to the speaker's podium, her simple human uniform looking almost primitive among the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other species representatives. She had been invited to address the Assembly as a courtesy, a gesture of respect for humanity's sacrifice at Kepler. Most of the delegates expected a brief summary of human losses and a request for aid in rebuilding their fleet. They were about to be disappointed. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. 6 months ago, your civilizations faced extinction. The collective had consumed 43 star systems and was advancing toward the core worlds at an unstoppable pace. Every weapon in your arsenals had failed. Every tactical doctrine had proven useless. She paused, letting her words sink in. "You called us because we were your last hope. Not because you believed in us, but because you had nowhere else to turn." A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembled delegates. The truth was often uncomfortable, especially when spoken so bluntly. The human fleet engaged the collective at Kepler and achieved a tactical victory through the sacrifice of our entire expeditionary force. 46 ships and 3,700 personnel gave their lives to break the collective's advance. Ambassador Ith Carr, now wearing crystal resonance patterns that indicated deep respect among his people, rose from his seat. "Admiral, the Assembly honors the sacrifice of your people. It is why we have gathered today to discuss reparations and support for rebuilding the human fleet. Sarah's expression didn't change. We don't want reparations. The chamber erupted in confused harmonic tones, bioacoustic pulses, and electronic interference patterns as dozens of species tried to express their surprise simultaneously. Furthermore, Sarah continued, once the noise died down, we don't need your help rebuilding our fleet. She activated a holographic display that showed the current disposition of human forces throughout the galaxy. The delegates stared in amazement at formations that had somehow tripled in size since the Battle of Kepler. How is this possible? Demanded the Corvin representative, its bioship trembling with agitation. Your industrial capacity cannot support such rapid fleet expansion. You're right, Sarah agreed. It can't. But our shipyards aren't building these vessels. The display shifted to show manufacturing facilities scattered across a dozen star systems. But these weren't the sterile, efficient factories that characterized advanced galactic civilization. These were rough, improvised constructions that looked like they'd been built by someone who cared more about function than form. These are collective facilities, Sarah explained, captured and converted to human production specifications. It turns out that when you break a hive mind's unity, the individual components become remarkably cooperative. The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. You're using collective technology? The ethereal representative asked, its energy patterns fluctuating with what might have been horror. We're using collective labor, Sarah corrected. Individual collective units, cut off from their hive mind, retain all their technical knowledge, but lack the unified purpose that made them aggressive. They're actually quite helpful once you explain what you need. She gestured to the back of the chamber, where two figures in environmental suits stood quietly. To most of the delegates, they looked like maintenance personnel, but Sarah could see the telltale organic metal skin and sensor clusters that marked them as former collective drones. Meet Engineers 7 and 12, Sarah said. They used to be part of a collective harvesting fleet. Now they design human starships. The delegates stared in shock at the two figures, who raised appendages in what they'd learned was a human greeting gesture. This is abomination, declared the machine collective representative, its mechanical voice harsh with electronic distortion. You have enslaved a fallen enemy. We've offered them employment, Sarah corrected. They're free to leave whenever they want. Most choose to stay because they find individual creativity more satisfying than hive mind unity. She pulled up another display showing production statistics. In 6 months, former collective facilities have produced more advanced technology than the rest of the galaxy combined in the past year. Faster-than-light drives that don't require exotic matter. Weapons that can reshape space-time. Defensive systems that adapt without requiring hive-mind coordination. The Zephyrian ambassador's crystal form was cycling through colors that indicated extreme agitation. Admiral, surely you understand the danger of this technology. In the wrong hands, it will be catastrophic, Sarah agreed, which is why it's staying in human hands. The chamber erupted again, this time with tones of outrage and alarm. You cannot claim exclusive rights to collective technology, the Corvin representative protested. The threat affected all of our civilizations equally. Did it? Sarah asked mildly. Because I seem to recall that when the threat first appeared, most of your civilizations immediately began planning evacuations to other galaxies. Only humans stayed to fight. She activated another display, this one showing strategic assessments from various galactic powers during the early days of the collective invasion. The ethereals withdrew to pocket dimensions. The machine collective went into full defensive mode. The Zephyrian Empire was building evacuation ships. Even the mighty Corvin hegemony was preparing to abandon the galaxy rather than face an enemy they couldn't defeat. The delegates shifted uncomfortably. The records were accurate, and they knew it. Only humans, Sarah continued, chose to stand and fight. Only humans were willing to sacrifice everything to stop a threat that would have consumed every civilization in the galaxy. So forgive me if I'm not inclined to share the rewards of our sacrifice with species that were ready to abandon us all. The ethereal representative pulsed with indignation. You would hold the galaxy hostage with superior technology? Sarah smiled, and there was something cold in her expression that made several delegates recoil. I would ensure that the next time an existential threat appears, the response isn't "let's call the humans," but rather "let's help the humans." She gestured to the holographic displays around the chamber. The collective isn't gone. Our intelligence suggests that significant portions of their fleet escaped to extragalactic space. They're regrouping, adapting, learning from their encounter with us. When they return, they'll be better prepared. Then, we must work together, HFY said urgently. Share technology, coordinate defenses, present a united front. Must we? Sarah asked. Because historically, cooperation between our species has been somewhat one-sided. Humans provide military solutions to galactic problems, and everyone else provides criticism of our methods. She pulled up records of previous conflicts where human forces had been deployed. The Rigel mining war, the pirate consortium suppression, the vegan sector rebellion. In each case, human casualties have been the highest. Human methods have been criticized as excessive, and human requests for support had been denied. For 200 years, the galaxy has treated humanity as a useful tool, Sarah said. A weapon to be deployed when civilized species need violence done on their behalf, then put away when the unpleasantness is over. That ends now. What are you proposing? The machine collective representative asked, its voice carefully neutral. Sarah smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. Partnership. Real partnership. Humans will share collective technology and military expertise with any species willing to commit to mutual defense treaties. In exchange, those species will provide industrial support, research assistance, and, most importantly, equal representation in any future galactic crisis. She gestured to the displays showing human collective hybrid technology. We're not trying to conquer the galaxy. We're trying to save it. But we're done being everyone's disposable heroes. The chamber was quiet for a long moment as the delegates considered her words. Finally, Ambassador HFY stood, his crystal form resonating with tones of formal agreement. The Zephyrian Empire accepts your terms, he said. We pledge our industrial capacity and research facilities to the Mutual Defense Alliance. One by one, other species began standing and offering their agreement. Not all of them, but enough. The ones who understood that the next threat might not give them time to call for help. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out to discuss the details with their respective governments, HFY approached Sarah. Admiral, he said, I must ask, when the collective returns, do you truly believe this alliance will be sufficient to stop them? Sarah looked out through the chamber's transparent walls at the stars beyond, where somewhere in the darkness, an ancient enemy was preparing for another assault on their galaxy. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know one thing for certain. When they come, they won't be facing a galaxy of separate civilizations fighting individual battles while humans do the dying. They'll be facing all of us together with the best technology and tactics any of our species can devise. She turned to face the crystal being. The galaxy used to laugh at humanity, Ambassador, called us primitive and violent and unpredictable. Now, those same qualities are the foundation of our mutual defense. And if that's not enough, Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. Then, we'll do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We'll improvise something even more impossible. Outside the chamber, the two former collective engineers waited patiently for their human colleagues. They had work to do, ships to design, weapons to build. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, their former hive mind was planning its return. But it would find a very different galaxy waiting for it. A galaxy that had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach. Sometimes the only way to survive the impossible is to become impossible yourself. The comedy species had become the guardians of galactic civilization, and they were just getting started.